U.S. President Donald Trump has held his first ever summit with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, at talks in the Finnish capital, Helsinki. The pair promised to improve relations between their two countries, despite a number of troublesome issues. Well, that includes allegations that Russia meddled in the 2016 U.S. election, although Putin denied any Russian interference. The pair also discussed nuclear stocks, Syria, and the Mideast at large, as they sought to reboot relations between Washington and Moscow. All right, let's see if they managed to do that. Let's go straight to Helsinki. Our correspondent Teri Schultz is on the scene. Teri?
Hi, Layla. Well, it remains to be seen when, as President Trump said, the National Security Councils will work out what actually was agreed here. What we heard from the press conference was both presidents sounding very conciliatory toward each other. President Putin denying that Russia ever has or ever will meddle in U.S. elections, and President Trump seeming to take him at his word. He said, I don't see why Russia would have meddled in our elections, and then went off on a long spiel about it being the DNC and Hillary staffers, that being Hillary Clinton, of course, his opponent in the U.S. presidential elections. Some of the other issues that people would have liked to hear more about would have been President Trump reiterating U.S. policy, NATO policy, European policy, that Crimea was illegally annexed by Moscow. President Trump did not say that, and President Putin used the old line that, Crimea held an election and decided to be part of Russia, so it now belongs to the Russian Federation. Some of the other things we didn't hear anything about were, for example, the Skripal poisoning. The international community has pointed a finger at Russia for this poisoning. That didn't even come up. Of course, journalists only got a handful of questions to both the Russian and the U.S. sides. So President Trump came out and said, the relationship has been bad, but I think we're going to turn a corner now. There's a bright future. He blamed bad relations on previous administrations and said now it's time to take a new step in this relationship. President Putin less effusive, but no less positive about the direction that they both thought these sides should move in. There were some other things that just struck my ears. For example, President Trump saying that the U.S. and Russian militaries cooperate very well. There are, NATO patrols that are scrambled every few days because Russian warplanes buzz NATO airspace, and the U.S. is part of those patrols. I wouldn't say that is getting along very well. I think what he must have been referring to was in the airspace over Syria, there is a working arrangement, not a partnership by any means, but sort of a mutual information line so that they can avoid collisions of airspace in Syria. And I can only imagine that's the only thing that he could have been referring to with our militaries working together. Of course, it was the Russian military that performed SNAP exercises very near the borders of the Baltic states. It is the Russian military that NATO is mobilized to counter should it cross into NATO territory. So that was a bit surprising. But I think that a couple of the statements that will stick with everybody is President Putin saying we're going to move forward on the basis of truth, not rumors, and President Trump going right along with that.
Yes, they gave us a lot of stuff to talk about, and we'll do so also with our colleagues in Washington as well and in Moscow. But before I let you go, Teri, when these two leaders meet, there's a lot of drama and build-up. Did this meeting live up to the hype?
It certainly did. Of course, everyone outside these two leaders was worried about the one-on-one session. And that's because, of course, there are suspicions that President Trump is too friendly to President Putin, and that holding a meeting with only interpreters would mean nobody knows what's said, nobody knows what's promised, nobody knows if there are any concessions made, particularly on the U.S. side toward the Russian side, something like a promise that, the U.S. doesn't really need to participate in NATO exercises that would protect the Baltic states. That was one big worry. Also on what might happen in Syria. They were very worried about, what President Trump may want to walk away with, some kind of victory from the Russian president, and what might be up for grabs for President Putin in that situation. So I think that was the biggest drama. That meeting went on longer than scheduled, 2 hours with just those two men in the room, and we'll never know exactly what was said. And then, of course, the meeting with advisors, also longer than expected. We waited a long time on that picture waiting for the press conference, and I think that they didn't disappoint. I think We expected them to come out both declaring victory, and I think that's exactly what we heard.
All right, and Teri, that is exactly what makes this so very difficult, is that there is no official record of what's been said, so we just have to go by what these two leaders have said. Teri Schultz reporting live from Helsinki. Thank you.